When one of Hollywood's most adored actresses found herself seated across from one of daytime television's most unpredictable personalities, the result was a moment that quickly spiraled into chaos. The encounter became a hot topic of discussion after Julia Roberts appeared on The View, and an exchange with Joy Behar took an unexpectedly hostile turn. What began as a routine promotional visit slowly unraveled into a tense confrontation that stunned both the studio audience and viewers at home, eventually pushing the beloved actress to her breaking point. The studio glowed under bright lights as Julia Roberts stepped onto the set, her familiar warmth instantly filling the room. She wore a flowing emerald dress that highlighted her unmistakable red hair, and her trademark smile drew thunderous applause from the audience. She greeted the crowd with an easy wave before settling into her seat beside the panel. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed her with genuine enthusiasm, joined by Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin, both clearly delighted to have such a high-profile guest on the show. Yet one presence stood apart. Joy Behar leaned back slightly, wearing a knowing smirk that suggested something less friendly was brewing beneath the surface. The discussion opened smoothly, filled with laughter and light conversation. Julia spoke about her recent film work, sharing amusing behind-the-scenes stories that drew chuckles from the audience and approving nods from the hosts. Sunny touched briefly on family life, and Julia responded with grace, maintaining her relaxed charm. Throughout it all, Joy remained unusually quiet, her gaze fixed on Julia with an intensity that felt unsettling. The contrast between the cheerful tone of the conversation and Joy's silence created a subtle tension that lingered in the air. Eventually, Joy broke her silence with a pointed remark that cut sharply through the pleasant mood. She commented on Julia's long career and implied that her roles lacked variety, suggesting that the actress had spent decades portraying the same familiar persona. The shift was immediate and jarring. The audience grew still, sensing a sudden change in direction. Julia's smile flickered briefly before she steadied herself, responding calmly and explaining that she had always sought diversity and depth in her work. Joy pressed on, dismissing the explanation with a tone that carried more bite than humor. She reduced Julia's career to a collection of romantic leads and charming smiles, implying that audiences had been shortchanged by an actress capable of more. The words landed heavily. Whoopi shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable, and attempted to soften the moment by praising Julia's range and accomplishments. Her effort barely slowed the momentum. Joy continued, questioning the authenticity of Julia's on-screen presence and casting doubt on the sincerity behind her public image. As the exchange intensified, Julia's demeanor changed. Her relaxed posture straightened, and the warmth that had defined her entrance faded. She spoke firmly about her commitment to honesty in her performances, emphasizing the care she brought to each role. Joy responded with a sharp laugh, dismissing the claim and suggesting that Julia had merely been playing a polished version of herself for decades. The tension grew thick, and the other hosts exchanged anxious glances as the atmosphere turned increasingly volatile. Sunny attempted to redirect the conversation toward upcoming projects, hoping to restore balance. The effort failed. Joy shifted the focus again, steering the discussion toward privilege and success. She painted a picture of an easy life, suggesting that Julia's fame and beauty had shielded her from real hardship. The studio fell into complete silence. The audience sensed they were witnessing a moment that had crossed from spirited debate into something far more personal. Julia's eyes flashed as she took a measured breath, working to maintain her composure. She spoke evenly, stating that assumptions were being made about her life without understanding her personal struggles or experiences. Her voice carried an edge now, restrained but unmistakable. Joy responded dismissively, trivializing Julia's challenges and reducing them to choices between luxury and comfort. The comment drew, and Joy continued without hesitation, accusing her guest of presenting a carefully polished version of her life that had been approved and refined by publicists. She suggested that the audience had rarely been allowed to see anything genuine, only a glossy image crafted for mass consumption. The implication cut deep, and the atmosphere in the studio became almost suffocating. Camera operators subtly shifted their angles, fully aware that the exchange unfolding before them was no longer a standard interview but something far more volatile. The remaining hosts sat rigid in their chairs, uncertain whether to interrupt or simply let the moment run its course as the situation escalated beyond control. Julia Roberts attempted to steady herself, though the strain was now evident in her voice. She explained that she had come onto the show to discuss her work and to engage respectfully with viewers, not to endure personal attacks that had nothing to do with her career. Her words were calm, but the emotion beneath them was unmistakable. Across from her, Joy Behar leaned back with visible satisfaction, clearly relishing the discomfort she had created. She dismissed Julia's response as oversensitivity and framed her own remarks as nothing more than blunt honesty, the kind she claimed talk shows were built upon. Julia pushed back, pointing out the clear line between sincerity and outright cruelty. She spoke of the difference between challenging questions and deliberate attempts to humiliate someone in public. Joy responded with a sharp, grating laugh and brushed off the concern, implying that anyone truly confident would not be affected by such remarks. The words struck like a slap. Julia's face flushed, and a heavy silence settled over the studio as everyone waited to see how she would respond. When Julia spoke again, her voice was quieter, controlled, and edged with steel. She repeated the word, strength, as if weighing it carefully, then explained what it meant to her. Strength, she said, was remaining seated while being torn down for the sake of spectacle. Strength was refusing to return cruelty with cruelty, even when provoked. Joy's expression brightened with a kind of malicious excitement, as though she believed she had finally stripped away the pleasant exterior she so clearly resented. She accused Julia of dropping an act and revealing something hidden beneath years of charm. Julia denied the accusation, insisting that what Joy was witnessing was not performance but restraint. She described her effort to preserve dignity in the face of hostility that had come without justification. Joy scoffed and claimed that every remark she had made was fair, arguing that public figures invited criticism by existing in the spotlight. At the table, Sarah Haynes looked deeply uncomfortable, her unease plain to see as she weakly suggested a commercial break. Joy waved off the idea, declaring that the discussion was only beginning. Without warning, Joy shifted the focus to Julia's personal life, referencing her marriages in a way that felt deliberately provocative. The audience reacted audibly, and Whoopi Goldberg finally spoke up, her shock evident as she called the line of discussion inappropriate. Joy challenged that objection, arguing that Julia frequently spoke about love through her films and interviews, and that her real-life history contradicted the romantic image she portrayed on screen. Julia's hands trembled as she responded, whether from anger or hurt impossible to tell. She stated firmly that her relationships were private matters and irrelevant to the purpose of her appearance. Joy pressed on regardless, claiming that those experiences revealed a gap between image and reality, and that Julia's career in romantic films gave a misleading impression of authority on relationships. Julia's voice tightened as she clarified that she had never claimed expertise in anything beyond her profession. She was an actress, she said, and playing characters was simply her job. Joy laughed again, repeating her assertion that Julia never stopped performing, even in moments like this. She accused her of constantly hiding behind roles and personas. Julia's composure finally cracked, her voice shaking as she spoke of the reality of the situation. The discomfort, the embarrassment, and the pain of being treated this way in front of millions, she said, were all painfully real. Joy responded with satisfaction, praising what she described as genuine emotion and dismissing Julia's usual warmth as calculated charm. Sunny Hostin looked appalled and questioned what Joy hoped to achieve by continuing. Joy fired back, accusing their guest of deceiving the public for decades and building a career on falsehood. Julia reacted with visible distress, her voice breaking as she challenged the accusation that everything she had worked for was fake. Joy answered coldly, labeling Julia a manufactured brand designed to sell films and magazine covers. She claimed that whoever the real Julia Roberts once was had been lost long ago. By this point, the cruelty in Joy's tone was unmistakable, and even the crew behind the cameras appeared uneasy as the confrontation reached a deeply uncomfortable intensity. Julia Roberts held Joy's gaze for several long seconds, her eyes shimmering as emotion finally broke through her composure. Her voice was quiet but steady when she spoke, carrying a weight that silenced the room. She said that Joy was right about one thing: there was indeed a real person beneath the public image. And that real person was telling her she did not have to remain seated and endure what was happening. She did not owe anyone her silence. Joy Behar scoffed immediately, mocking the word abuse as if it were ridiculous. She brushed it aside, insisting that asking difficult questions was not mistreatment. Julia rose from her chair then, the movement decisive and calm rather than dramatic. She clarified that the issue was not challenging conversation, but the deliberate attempt to humiliate someone, to strip away their worth in front of an audience. That, she said firmly, was abuse, and she would not accept it from Joy or from anyone else. For the first time, Joy's expression shifted. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face, as though she were only just realizing how far the situation had gone. She tried to laugh it off, telling Julia not to overreact and urging her to sit back down, framing everything as a simple discussion. Julia did not move. She replied that this was not a discussion at all. It was a public dismantling of her character, carried out under the guise of conversation. She accused Joy of using her platform to intimidate and belittle, and stated clearly that she would no longer take part in it. The rest of the panel looked alarmed. Whoopi Goldberg stood as well, her voice urgent as she tried to calm the situation and keep Julia from leaving. She suggested they could still resolve things. Julia shook her head gently while reaching for the microphone clipped to her clothing. She said some situations could not be smoothed over with apologies or explanations. Some actions, she explained, were simply wrong and no amount of backtracking could change that. Sensing control slipping away, Joy softened her tone and attempted a different tactic. She claimed that if Julia's feelings had been hurt, that had not been her goal. She said she had only been aiming for honesty. Julia turned fully toward her, and the pain in her expression was impossible to miss. She told Joy that everything about the exchange had been intentional. Every question, every remark, every subtle insult had been designed to make her appear foolish or false. Joy, she said, had arrived with a plan, and that plan was to tear her down. Joy protested weakly, denying any such intention, but her words lacked conviction. Julia challenged her calmly, pointing out that not a single comment had been neutral or constructive. She noted how Joy had ignored repeated attempts by the other hosts to redirect the conversation toward something more respectful. She added that Joy appeared to take pleasure in her discomfort, a fact that had become increasingly obvious as the segment continued. Joy fell silent for a moment, clearly unsettled. The studio audience remained completely still, hanging on every second of the exchange. When Joy finally spoke, she defended herself by invoking her role, saying it was her job to ask difficult questions. Julia answered with quiet intensity, saying that in that moment Joy was not acting as a journalist, she was acting as a bully. Julia added that she had spent too much of her life dealing with bullies to remain seated and accept it now. The word landed heavily. Joy's face flushed, and she looked genuinely shaken for the first time since the confrontation began. The silence in the studio deepened as the two women stared at one another across the table, the tension almost unbearable. Joy snapped back defensively, insisting she was not a bully and claiming years of experience without such an accusation. Julia responded evenly, saying that perhaps it was time someone finally told her the truth. She explained that there was a clear difference between being provocative and being cruel. Joy's jaw tightened as she pushed back, accusing Julia of cruelty instead. She spoke about deception, about presenting a false image to millions of people. Julia fired back, demanding to know what lie she was supposedly telling. She said that if her crime was trying to bring happiness through her work, then she did not understand the accusation. Joy replied that Julia was pretending to be perfect, presenting herself as a source of light and optimism, while others struggled through real hardships. Julia shook her head slowly, disbelief written across her face. She stated plainly that she had never claimed perfection or universal wisdom. All she had ever done was her job, which was to entertain and perhaps offer people a brief escape, a reason to smile for a short while. Joy continued, arguing that Julia made life look too easy, as if joy and success were simple choices. Julia responded with genuine confusion, noting that her effort to remain positive seemed to be what angered Joy the most. Joy erupted, declaring that such positivity was unrealistic. She said life was difficult, chaotic, and often painful, and that pretending otherwise dismissed the struggles of countless people. Around them, the other hosts remained frozen, watching as the exchange transformed from a television interview into an intensely personal confrontation, one that felt far removed from the polished image of The View and far closer to something raw, unresolved, and deeply uncomfortable. Whoopi Goldberg looked as though she was desperately calculating how to bring the situation to a close without pouring more fuel on the fire. Beside her, Sarah Haynes and Sunny Hostin appeared visibly shaken, their expressions reflecting genuine discomfort at what was unfolding in front of them. The energy in the studio had shifted completely. Julia Roberts fell silent for several long seconds, and when she finally spoke again, her tone was calm and low, yet filled with a steadiness that felt newly formed. She acknowledged that Joy was correct about one thing. Life, she said, was not simple or gentle. It was complicated, chaotic, and often filled with pain, loss, and disappointment. Joy seemed momentarily caught off guard by this agreement, as though she had not expected Julia to meet her on that ground. Julia continued, her voice growing stronger with each word, explaining that life was also full of beauty. It held moments of deep love, unexpected joy, and quiet wonder. If her work, if her optimism that Joy dismissed as fake, helped even one person remember those moments, then she stood by it without regret. Joy muttered that such a view was naive, though the sharp certainty she had carried earlier was fading. Julia responded without raising her voice, stating that what was truly naive was believing that tearing others down made someone more authentic. She added that cynicism was not inherently more truthful than hope, and that choosing to see light did not mean denying darkness. Joy's face flushed, her irritation becoming more visible by the second. She snapped back, warning Julia not to lecture her on authenticity or imply moral superiority. Julia calmly denied any claim of being better than anyone. As she began to detach her microphone, she said she was simply choosing not to remain part of what the exchange had become. Joy fired back harshly, calling it reality, insisting this was what happened when someone was finally confronted about their carefully maintained image. Julia paused, her hand resting on the microphone wire, and looked directly at Joy. She said reality was spending 20 minutes trying to dismantle another person for personal satisfaction. Reality was using a powerful platform not to inform, entertain, or inspire, but to wound. Joy insisted she had been doing her job, though her voice wavered slightly. Julia countered that interviewing guests did not mean attacking them. Creating engaging television, she said, did not require humiliating someone who had arrived in good faith. At that moment, Whoopi tried once more to intervene, urging everyone to slow down and take a breath. Julia interrupted gently but firmly, explaining that not everything could be repaired. Some actions could not be excused. She had come expecting a respectful conversation about her work and experiences, only to be ambushed by someone who seemed to derive satisfaction from another person's pain. Joy abruptly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She told Julia to leave if she wanted, accusing her of running away when things became uncomfortable. Julia turned back toward her, sadness flickering briefly across her face. She said that people like her chose not to engage with cruelty, chose not to reward harmful behavior with continued presence. Joy, now nearly shouting, defended herself again, claiming she had asked reasonable questions of a wealthy public figure who profited from a wholesome image. Julia replied quietly, pointing out that Joy had revealed her true belief. She believed Julia was pretending, that everything about her was an act. Julia added that this belief said far more about Joy than it did about her. Joy struggled to respond, her mouth opening and closing as she searched for words that would not come. The studio audience remained utterly silent, transfixed by the raw emotion playing out before them. Julia began walking toward the edge of the set, her microphone fully removed. She paused briefly to say that she hoped Joy would one day understand why she felt compelled to behave that way, and what she had truly been trying to achieve. Joy called after her, insisting the conversation was not over. Julia stopped at the edge of the stage and turned back one final time. She said simply that it was finished, completely and definitively. With that, Julia Roberts walked off the set of The View, leaving behind a stunned audience, a panel of hosts struggling to process what had just happened, and an enraged Joy Behar still standing at the table, breathing heavily in disbelief. The cameras continued to roll as Joy slowly sank back into her chair, the weight of the moment finally settling in. She had pushed one of Hollywood's most celebrated stars beyond her limit, and the consequences were unfolding live before millions. Whoopi cleared her throat and looked directly into the camera, announcing a commercial break, though the warmth and confidence usually present in her voice were noticeably absent. The atmosphere in the studio was heavy, charged with the understanding that something significant had just taken place. As the show cut away, the audience remained seated, buzzing with shock and disbelief. What they had expected to be a routine celebrity appearance had instead become one of the most intense confrontations ever seen on daytime television, a moment destined to be replayed, debated, and remembered for years.